Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cranbrook Art Museum. Hello, good evening. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Lila Catelier. I'm the Curator of Public Programs at Cranbrook Art Museum. And today I'd like to introduce you to our Chairs hat, as well as a beautiful set of note cards that were all women-designed textiles, which are both available in our shop. We hope that you enjoy our custom-specific swag to the show. We don't always get custom merchandise for exhibitions, but we're very, very excited about the imagery that we got to work with for this exhibition. And so I'd love to invite you to head up to the shop on your way out of the museum and check out the special items that we made for the show. It's been really my pleasure. This project we started working on shortly after I started here, and it's been really a wonderful thing to see this exhibition come together and to see the work of Bridget Bartal, our curatorial fellow. This is her first project out of grad school at Bard, and we are just incredibly proud of her. Also, just like on a personal level, if it weren't for the way that Andrew Blauvelt sees history, I would certainly not be working at Cranbrook Art Museum. It's incredibly important, the vision that he has for opening up the past and finding the people who have been left out of the narrative and bringing them to light. I think that that's really the sort of crux of the work that has occurred under his directorship of the Art Museum, and I think that that has thrust this museum into a place that it certainly was, because this is the cradle of modernism, but it wasn't necessarily being really shouted from the rooftops in the way that I think that the museum is currently doing. So I'm really, really delighted to introduce this project and to introduce this book and to work under Andrew and to support Bridget in her work for this exhibition. So extremely proud of the team on this. We're also very excited to welcome Amy Auscherman, the head of brand and archives for Herman Miller and Knoll. Miller-Knoll, excuse me. We all do it, okay? Amy, too, has been really a delight to work with. I can't think of a better person to steward the legacy of this work, and so I'm just really, really excited to introduce this conversation today. I want to let you guys in on a little bit of a secret. You may know that we had organized some tours to see the Miller-Knoll archives throughout the months of July and August, and that those tours sold out really quickly. And fortunately for the people in this room, you're the first to know that we will be adding an additional tour exit to August 29th, which is the Friday before Labor Day, but trust me, it'll be worth it. And so if you'd like to go on that trip, like, take out your phone right now and email me and just be like, Lila, I want one of those tickets, because I will send you the link before it goes live, because you're sitting in the room right now. So if you'd like to join us on that trip, please email me. My email is very easy to find on the website. Just let us know that you'd like to get those tickets, and we'll make sure that you get access to the link before it goes onto the website. So a number of really wonderful tours of the exhibition are scheduled with Bridget also throughout the exhibition. I also want to alert you to the last event that we're going to be hosting at the Art Museum as part of this exhibition on September 20th, which is a conversation on design collections. This region is extremely blessed to have the Detroit Institute of the Arts, the Henry Ford, and Cranbrook Art Museum all collecting and investing in design. And we're very excited to welcome Catherine White and Shelley Salim to that conversation to talk about what is happening in those design collections. So I highly recommend you come to that event as well. The last thing that I just want to mention is another book that I think you all will probably be interested in. It's called American Modern, and it's the story of Columbus, Indiana, and its sort of community impact and how the organization sort of has developed. The book is written by Matt Shaw, and the photographs are by Iwan Bon, and it's really a fantastic sort of experience. And they will be here to talk about this book on Thursday, July 10th. So highly recommend also that you attend that event. So just a couple of things coming up that you might want to be a part of. that I thought I would tell you about. And for now, I'm going to introduce Andrew Satake Blofeld.
Thank you. And Bridget Bartel as well. We're just decided to be a union. So a little housekeeping because as Lila mentioned, the project has been 3 years in the making. And to do a project like that, you need some very generous people. And I'd like to thank for both the exhibition and the publication, first and foremost, Miller Knoll for sponsoring Bridget's work over the past 3 years. It has been a lifesaver. So thank you to Amy and company. Others who support our exhibitions include the Gilbert Family Foundation, the DeRoy Testamentary Foundation, the George Frank Carr Art Museum Exhibition Fund, the Clannad Foundation, Bonham's Auction House, and individuals from our museum committee, Karen and Drew Bacon, and Mark Schwartz and Emily Carminer. Thank you all to those people for making shows like this possible, especially at this scale, and as hopefully you've gotten to see upstairs, or you will after this talk. It's really quite an effort to put all of that together. We were going to give a little introduction, focusing primarily on the book tonight, since we're doing the book launch. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for purchasing those books. And when you purchase the book, you help support the show. So that's it all comes together. It all connects eventually. All the money connects. Whoops. There you go. So the genesis of this project really began, it's such a natural project for Cranbrook to host because of the instrumental role that Cranbrook Academy of Art, our sister institution here on campus, which is a graduate school for the visual arts and for art and architecture and design, had. It opened in 1932, and by the end of that decade, it was already firmly planted in the public imagination as a hotbed of creative talent from who would become the leading designers in the mid-century movement, which we'll discuss a little bit more. So to have an exhibition about mid-century design is really an obvious thing, but something that we had not really done in a large survey format before. We've had a few exhibitions that perhaps you've seen over the years in the last decade or so. George Nelson, for example, or the Alexander Gerard exhibition where we focused on individuals. But we haven't had that opportunity to look at it in terms of context. And so we use this exhibition in order to expand that context. We, of course, have the Cranbrook collection, which includes pieces by famous Cranbrook graduates like Charles and Ray Eames, Harry Bertoia, Ralph Rapson, Jerry Kavanaugh, Saarinen, yes, Eero Saarinen, Florence Knoll, pretty much all the characters, right? So that's quite a roster of talent to draw upon. But then in our own examination, at the museum, we discovered this exhibition, which is prescient, because we discovered it right before the two companies merged, Knoll and Herman Miller. This exhibition was created by Catherine and Michael McCoy, who are the designers in residence of the graphic and product design programs here at the Academy, and came here in 1972. This show is from 1975. It's a modification of a traveling exhibition that brings those two companies together, who were former competitors, right? And so, but they all have ties to Cranbrook. And so when the companies merged, we thought this was a perfect opportunity, because we have to play nice with both sides of the family, so to speak. And so when the families got together and became one family, it was so much easier to be able to say, hey, we're doing this project, would you like to invest in that? So we thank them for their efforts. A little primer, so we have to get a little bit of education because we're an educational campus. So when people ask, like, everyone sort of knows about mid-century design, but a lot of people don't think deeply about, like, how did we get here for this? And so if we think about mid-century design versus modern design, I always think of it as like two waves. So we have the first wave of modern design, which emanates largely from Europe, and that people associate that school with the Bauhaus, for example. And so when you think about that first wave of of modern design in the 1920s and 30s, you think of that. But then mid-century design is a unique beast that was incubated here in the United States. So that's why our show focuses on the U.S. There were a lot of people coming into the country, fleeing Europe at that time in World War II, but largely kind of concocted and baked in America. And so we have this kind of list of comparisons. We think of modern design as being achromatic, or like I always joke, the only color you could really use is red. If you know architects, it's black and white and sometimes red. It's the joke. And so with mid-century design, the color palette really opens up. Of course, ornament was banished under classic modernism, an unembellished surface. We get back to ornamentation, we get back to texture. We get back to something really important, which is emotion, that the primary characteristic or impetus would be to create emotion in the users, or emotional response, where in modernism in Europe, it was a very rationalistic approach. And the influences are different. Eurocentric and modernism. In mid-century modernism, non-Western influences were brought into the equation. The handcrafted was celebrated. Even if you couldn't have it exactly, it would mimic the handcrafted. Whereas in European modernism, the machine was the exalted the best creator, the removal of the hand, the house for living, the chair for living. Synthetic and natural materials coexisted at the same time in mid-century design as plastics and other new man-made materials were coming into the market, but also the resurgence of natural materials to signify nature, and of course industrial materials with modern design. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is this idea of organic forms, the idea of the curve and the curvilinear as a different kind of expression coming out of nature. Versus the Platonic forms and classic geometric forms of the circle, triangle, and square that we associated with places like the Bauhaus. So these are kinds of the thoughts that we had in terms of formulating the exhibition that you see upstairs. But the quote itself, the title of the show, comes from this quote from Charles Eames: "Eventually everything connects people, ideas, and objects." And as curators, I think we latched on to this quote very early on, because what's significant, I think, about it is that all of these three things, people, ideas, and objects, can all be what we call actors in terms of this idea of network theory, which is really just connections between people. How do movements come into existence? And it's largely through people, but it's also through the idea of how ideas travel. We accept this very much today when we talk about memes, for example. And then objects also have their own kind of life force, and they begin to stand in and become actors in such networks. So Bridget and I were interested in mining this idea of networks. And the idea of connections is so intrinsic to the Eames, whether you think about their classic LCM here, the lounge chair metal, and the fact that all of these parts are existing. So it's a three-dimensional collage, if you think about it that way. And all of those joints are articulated, right, for a reason, and that's what makes it a kind of revolutionary chair. Or if you think about a film like Powers of 10, hopefully you've seen it, but this kind of infinite zoom out where you go both into the human body and then into space, depending on which way you're going, up or down, is this idea of connections, that everything in the universe is ultimately connected. So we started the project. This is a rather famous photograph. It's the original photograph. It was published in, of all places, Playboy magazine in July of 1961. And I always joke that, yes, you could read the articles back then. They had very amazing writers as part of this. But this is a group shot that they did with lots of people in it. And just to illustrate the concept of connections, we wanted to go in. Oh, this was to prove that it was actually an article. And that's actually a very good article. They actually quote a lot. A lot of people just show the photograph and they've never read the article. But the article is contemporaneous account of what makes mid-century design, which they didn't have that term then. That term was coined in the 1980s, actually. But this new form of modernism, how it was different than the preceding generation of modernism. So these are the characters in that photograph. So we have George Nelson, Ed Wormley, Eero Saarinen, Harry Bertoia, Charles Eames, and Jens Rissam, all identified as leading practitioners of furniture. I don't understand why George Nelson's sitting on a cart, but I don't think it's
design.
yeah. He doesn't get a chair, I guess. Poor George. It must not have arrived to the photo shoot. So what's interesting, of course, about this immediately is like, well, they're all white men. So like, where are the other people? And in the article, some of the women appear, of course, like almost parenthetically, like Ray Eames, who is the lifelong, business and design collaborating partnership with Charles. She's described as the sculptress wife. Right, so she is assigned an artistic role, and she did study painting, and she did a few sculptures, some of which we have upstairs, in this kind of biomorphic style, but it was very much a designer and participant in all of that. And another person famously, also from Cranbrook, Florence Knoll, who's referenced as being an important designer, but is not featured or no articulation other than the focus on Eero Saarinen, who was one of, of course, the star designers at the time. But the idea behind this photograph is just the interconnectedness. So we have Eero Saarinen in his womb chair and Charles Eames on his LCM. And of course, they came together here at Cranbrook to collaborate on this prototype chair, which is upstairs from our collection for the organic design competition that the Museum of Modern Art introduces. So the concept of organic design, they end up winning that competition. But they will also include other figures, of course. Harry Bertoia was also with them at Cranbrook at the time and was helping them figure out how to develop that a complex kind of curve and the form making that went into the wood. That was part of what Charles and Ray began here at Cranbrook and when they moved to Los Angeles, kind of perfected. But they would ultimately, Charles would be hired and Ray would be hired by George Nelson, of course, who was the head of design director at Herman Miller. But then Florence Knoll would be connected to Jens Rissam. Her husband, Hans Knoll, had started that company and had started in this vein of kind of more Scandinavian-inflected design. But then she would bring in both Harry Bertoia later and Eero Saarinen as she steals Harry Bertoia from the Eameses out in California, sends him off to Pennsylvania. So the odd man out is Ed Wormley, who is an important designer from that period. He's probably the most successful person in terms of selling design because he offered a kind of transitional type design that kind of mediated between, full-on modern and classical. But he's also oddly described in the article. He was openly gay in his own circles, but that would be very radical at the time. And this is a picture of his, I believe they meet when they're teenagers.
Yes.
Yeah, and so they were lifelong. Ed Krause.
The
Eds, the two Eds. And they characterize him as an interior decorator or interior designer and what a struggle he has because he has to produce new furniture every year. And so he's the design director in Indiana. For Dunbar, furniture company. And so it's just a classic kind of like querying of him, but not outing him at the same time. So kind of fascinating. And we just want to contrast it with this photograph, which is another group photo, but this one from Knoll from 1951. And the cast of characters here with Florence Knoll at the center, you could see how already it's much more diverse group. It includes George Nakashima, Nisima Noguchi, Naomi Raymond, Esther Harazzi, and of course there's Harry and Richard Stein and Abel Sorensen as making up that group, and Dorothy Cole, and a lot of the women are involved in the textiles division, which is started at both companies out of a need. So I'm going to transition over to Bridget. She's going to talk a little bit about the book that you've all thankfully purchased and how it's structured.
Thank you, Andrew. As we've talked about, the exhibition and its accompanying publication are really a culmination of 3 years of research. My first project out of my master's degree studying design history. So as someone who mostly specialized in 20th century American design, I can't imagine a more fitting place to be starting out, and with an incredible support from Miller Knoll. But one of the ways we really started out, my first probably full year on the job was was a year dedicated to research, which, of course, what a privilege for a young curator. But this involved traveling to universities, museums, and archives across the country, including the Miller Knoll Archives in Zeeland, Michigan, about 2.5 hours from here. And so over the course of my first year, we had the Herman Miller Archive, and then slowly the Knoll Archive rolled in from New York, and finally the Knoll Textiles Archive. And so eventually, just for the sake of this project, it really just became the dream site of, kind of killing a lot of birds with one stone. So I really started out by kind of charting out on large pieces of paper these expansive networks of people, ideas, and objects. And they were grouped around a central node or a magnetic connecting point. And so I'll show one of my maps later on in the presentation, but I must have just been kind of, hunched over my desk like a mad scientist scrawling on these big pieces of paper. I still have them, and they're really fun to look back on now. But so we took the idea of the connections theme, and we very literally applied it to the structure of the book and the table of contents. So you will notice this is one of 2 of the table of contents spreads, that there are no chapters, there are no formal section breaks. Instead, we commissioned an essay on kind of one of these magnetic nodes that was intertwined with our spotlights, as we called them, which were much shorter pieces of writing on a particular person, idea, or object. And it's all woven together. Sometimes quite subtly, sometimes a little more punch you in the face, obviously. But here you'll see, of course, the essays followed by affiliated people, ideas, and objects. And one of the main goals in identifying these, who are we going to write about? We wrote about almost 75 designers and architects, and the goal, of course, was really to foreground underrepresented designers, women, designers of color, and LGBTQ plus designers. And so that was a goal that we took very seriously, and to represent those stories was a huge honor. So we commissioned 23 essays by very prominent design historians. It was really a fun bunch of authors, and so nice to meet some of them finally at the opening. But I just wanted to flip through a few of these essays to just give you a little sampling of the book. So here we have an essay by design historian Andrew Gardner about MoMA's 1950s good design shows, which kind of prescribed what is a good modern product for the average American consumer. We also have an essay by design historian Sakura Nomayama on the cross-cultural exchange between the US and Japan in the mid-century period, and how designers like George Nelson and Charles and Wright Eames are traveling to Japan, while Japanese industrial designers such as Sori Yanagi and Isamu Kenmochi are coming to the US. They're lecturing, they're talking, they're schmoozing, and there's a lot of just exchange that you see in the designs of that period. We have also one of our close collaborators, Catherine White, curator of design at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, who writes on Peggy Ann Rohde, who was a designer who worked with Gilbert Rohde, one of the first design directors of Herman Miller, and was an accomplished designer in her own right. We also have an essay that maybe Amy Osherman will touch on later tonight about the furniture designs for both Herman Miller and Knoll of Isamu Noguchi. And then the last essay that I'll point out, second to last, sorry, is by a curator of photography at the Art Institute of Chicago, Yachen Zhao. And this is on Soichi Tsunami, who was an exhibition photographer who for nearly 30 years captured all of the most famous MoMA design shows and never got his name on almost any of the photography. But he also was a photographer who captured Noguchi and many modern dancers earlier in his career, such as Martha Graham, who is connected in endless ways to these designers, which was really a fun discovery. Lastly, I'll mention Estelle and Erwin Laverne, another very prominent, well, not anymore, they're pretty under-recognized, but a really prolific design couple who designed furniture, textiles, interiors, and ran their own business. And so I always like to point out that, it was easy sometimes for Ray Eames to be cut out of the picture if someone like George Nelson, the director of Herman Miller, thought that it would sell more products to have just Charles's name on it. But in the case of Estelle and Erwin, they owned the business. Estelle was a poet and wrote the copy for the ads, brochures, and everything. So she really got to decide if her name was going to go on it or not, which I love. And you never see Erwin mentioned without Estelle, which was really lovely to see. As I mentioned, we also have then 70 spotlights interwoven in. Again, I'm going to just give a few of our kind of greatest hits. For me, one of the biggest joys of the publication was writing about Pedro Guerrero. Pedro Guerrero was the longtime architectural photographer of Frank Lloyd Wright for, I think, 35 years, and has just been totally kind of overshadowed by the Ezra Stolars and Balthazar Korabs of the period. But we also have Minoru Yamasaki, a Detroit-based architect who is often remembered only for two buildings that no longer stand, the Pruitt-Igoe buildings in St. Louis and the World Trade Center in New York, but was a prolific, incredible architect who was best friends with George Nelson, Florence Knoll, and Harry Bertoia, basically, and is never mentioned in those histories. Ruth Adler Schnee is a 1946 design graduate who set up shop in Detroit and ran her own modern design shop, as well as designing these really whimsical, incredible, colorful, playful textiles that really, to me, capture the movement of mid-century modernism more than almost anyone else in the show. We have Joel Robinson, who is the only Black designer to be featured in MoMA's Good Design shows that I previously mentioned. And Robinson is kind of seemingly poised for this really successful career. He's in 3 of the 5 MoMA Good Design shows, which was a huge feat. And then by around 1955 or 56, he totally, there's no trace of him in the design field or textile design field, and he transitions to a very, very successful advertising career, but likely was met with just extreme barriers of entry as a Black designer in the period. Next, we have someone close to our hearts here at Cranbrook, Pipsan Saarinen Swanson, who is just a woman who wore many hats as a successful furniture designer, textile designer. We have some of her glass work in the gallery, as well as an interior designer. I have just a few more for you, but this is Ray Komai, who is, again, someone who started out first kind of in furniture and textile design, eventually transitioning to becoming a full-time graphic designer and working for the United States Information Agency. We also have Lucia Drespinez, who worked with George Nelson from 1956 to 1963. There were many women in the Nelson office, and they had relatively progressive hiring practices, but Drespinez was the only woman working in industrial design, and she designs 2 of the most iconic, noticeable, or recognizable Howard Miller clocks. She also designs the Dunkin' Donuts logo in 1976 that's still in use today. She was one of the, we got to meet her, and it was quite the honor. And then I have 2 more people to spotlight, which is Francis and Michael Higgins, who were pioneers in fused glass, and then also Jane and Gordon Martz, who ran Marshall Studios in Petersburg, Indiana. And you'll notice if you take a look through our book, it's just full of mid-century craft and design couples, and there were even more than we probably could have ever expected in the research. They just kept popping up. So one of the last things I wanted to point out, I promised one of my mind maps that I made. So this is the map I made of GM Tech Center in Warren, Michigan, which was completed in 1955. The architect is Eero Saarinen, interiors by Florence Knoll, Cranbrook hands are all over it. We have Marianne Strengel, head of weaving, head of ceramics, Maya Gretel, and many others. So here at the center, you see the node, the magnetic node, which is the tech center itself. And then we have an essay by Natalie Morath, lead archivist at General Motors, describing, the campus as a whole in the broadest terms before narrowing in on 6 spotlights on affiliated designers. So for example, there's Laverne furniture all over. Jerry Kavanaugh's a 1952 Cranbrook grad who was recruited by GM right out of her time at Cranbrook and did a few sculptures as well for the tech center. So here you have that core essay based on the node. But then we also have the spotlights. So one spotlight we wanted to talk about was the exteriors of Saarinen's building are graced by these 12 prominent glazed brick colors that are formulated by Maya Gretel, head of ceramics from 1938 to 66 here at our academy, as well as the colorist for the whole project, Alexander Gerard. And so here on the right, you can see kind of like a test wall of Gretel and Gerard's glazed bricks. And in around 1950, Gretel is formulating the glaze here on Cranbrook's campus upon Eero Saarinen's request. So really just showing the different spotlights that branch off of the essays. Another important spotlight in the GM world of the 1950s were the Damsels of Design, which was a group of women who, after studying primarily at Pratt Institute and Cranbrook Academy of Art, were recruited by GM to kind of design cars for women. Some of them also designed products for Frigidaire. Jerry Kavanaugh worked on exhibition design, and then many of them did styling for interiors of cars. But on the right, we'll have the aforementioned Jerry Kavanaugh. So here you'll see again, we have about 6 pages on the damsels themselves, and then also a breakout spotlight on Jerry Kavanaugh, one of 3 women actually from Cranbrook who work with General Motors in the 1950s. So I will now pass back over to Andrew to kind of answer, okay, why is mid-century modernism so long-lastingly impactful? Why was this project so important?
So yeah, that's one of the questions we get the most is like, why are we still talking about mid-century modernism? And the funny thing with the Playboy article is that the writer at the time doesn't think that it will have like this long historical staying power. And by the end of the article, he's reflecting on that this could all be, like in the backwater of design history as design history moves forward. And of course, that doesn't happen. And being, as I mentioned earlier, the term mid-century modern doesn't come into existence until the 1980s, and James Zimenis, who's one of the experts in this whole area, reflects on that. We're both around the same age, so we both kind of grew up in the same time of when these things started coming back into people's lives. I mean, I started collecting mid-century design from Goodwills when everyone was throwing out that furniture, so Bertoia chairs for $5, that kind of thing. Doesn't happen anymore, but unfortunately. But it's an important aspect of that. But to get really at the core of that, it's like it becomes kind of our very definition of modern. If we think about it, when we think of classics, when we think of classic modern furniture, we often think of mid-century modern icons. And the expressiveness that was there that appealed to the humanism, to bring humanism back into the modernist equation was such a strong point. But I think its staying power really has to do with this idea of emotions. If you know anything about economics in the world, we used to try to explain economics rationally, right? But people are not rational beings, as we know too well today. But so what we have left is this idea of emotion, and so many of the designers were able to channel that emotion and that spirit into the design. And one of the interesting things in the book that you'll notice, the book kind of like tapers off at the end with the introduction and the triumph of ergonomics, which is actually ironically the study of the human body and how people sit and et cetera. But it's most like the science, and we lose the art, I would argue. people at Miller Knoll will probably not agree with this, so they're not backing that. But I think what has happened is that we've lost the human creativity in the design element to a lot of furniture design, a lot of interior design and textile design, and what we need to do is recover that spirit again. And I think that's why the work is still so resonant with folks. And you can see people when they walk in the gallery, they have a smile. You know, it just brings that automatically out, because that's, I think, what is being communicated. I just want to recognize Chris Baker. Is he in the audience somewhere? Oh, over there. Chris Baker is the designer for the book. So we worked for a very long time, back and forth on getting that done. Chris is a graduate of the graphic design program here at the Academy. So he actually moved, unbeknownst, he moved to Holland, Michigan. So he's right around the corner from Miller Knoll. So that was very, very convenient. And I also like to acknowledge our institutional partner, which is the Henry Ford Museum, and Catherine White, and the whole team at Henry Ford, who gave us some amazing loans. If you haven't been there, they're a huge repository for modern design, especially mid-century design. So I'd like to thank them for their cooperation and collaboration on this project. Would you like to introduce Amy?
Amy, please join us at the podium.
Hi, everyone. My name's Amy Osherman. I'm the Director of Archives and Brand Heritage at Miller Knoll, which is a pretty fun job in a corporate context. Before Miller Knoll, I worked at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, digitizing the Miller House and Garden archive. And actually, during that project, visited Cranbrook for the first time a little over 10 years ago with the Michigan Modern program. And I cannot overstate what a transformative and overwhelming experience it was to come to this campus for the first time and experience Saarinen, both young and old, kind of glean an understanding of where Florence and Arrow grew up, where the Eameses met, and really fell in love with this place. So professionally, and also being a big fan of Andrew Blauvelt. I call myself an Andrew Blauvelt fangirl as a design historian, curator adjacent. And so this project over the last couple of years, for me personally and professionally, has been a dream, and not to mention bringing someone as amazing and now a formidable talent in Bridget Bartal as the next generation of design curator. So we've had a lot of fun over the last couple of years. And I'm going to show you pictures. This is like a commercial for what we're trying to sell here tonight, or one thing. Yes!
Magic.
Okay.
Laura Baumbach, everybody.
Thank you. And I'll be swift, but just to give you guys some context of what sort of collections we are dealing with in-house now at Miller Knoll. I've been with the company for about 10 years, like I said, and started off as just Herman Miller's corporate archive, which was voluminous, amazing furniture, textiles, but also correspondence and sort of the business records of how this movement sort of happened and proliferated, and the business side of design that I think sometimes, even in a museum context, is divorced from these things that get put on plinths, and actually the business side is quite important. And so with this merger of Knoll and Herman Miller, for me, what happened the morning that I found out, where it felt like Christmas, was the first thing that kind of occurred to me was Cranbrook. Like, duh, of course these two companies could be under one roof in a sexy consolidation, and really needing to create that context for clients, but also our people internally, because we have a huge, amazing sales force, and when you're merging Knoll and Herman Miller and you have a bunch of people that have been trained for years to talk about how much the other sucks, you really have to appeal to the heart and the mind. And so we've spent the last few years merging both of our corporate archives. I think there. Okay, so A big part of our job as the archives in the merger was consolidating the corporate collections of Knoll and Herman Miller. And now our collecting remit includes all of the brands that are part of Miller Knoll, which also includes Maharam, which is a textile company, Knoll Textiles, CBS, which is a monitor arm company, Design Within Reach. So now we have the ability to sort of have a more contemporary design collecting lens, which will be really fun. But first, we had to get our literal house in order, get all of this stuff to one place. Knoll's archives had lived between East Greenville, Pennsylvania, and New York, and we've since relocated them in our corporate headquarters in Holland, Michigan, in this new archive space. I have to say, if it's not obvious, Cranbrook Open Collections storage here was on the mood board, and so I think pitching this internally as something we should do, this was an inspiration of how you could show collections, the depth and the breadth, and client tours, student groups, curators. We had a bit of an outside need to display this stuff, but really needed to create a space to do that. We started off with this inaugural exhibition, which we called Manufacturing Modern, which certainly nods to the fact that we are a manufacturing company, which I think is pretty cool. We actually make this stuff. And these two companies, as Bridget and Andrew so well note in this project, that they kind of invented the industry. They invented the ways to sell it, the ways to display it, and created the context for people when, when this stuff came out, it looked like it was from outer space. So you had to convince the housewives or whoever was being advertised to in House Beautiful or Interiors Magazine that, yeah, fiberglass chair is really easy to clean, or modular, infinitely configurable storage is what you needed in your new open plan. And so this exhibition, while conveniently showing still some of our best sellers, also acts as a bit of a design history 101. Objects that you see in it, not dissimilar to what you see upstairs, but showing those connections between the designers, the materials, the ideas. Knoll has a pretty remarkable Harry Bertoia sculpture collection, as Florence Knoll was constantly commissioning him, not only for industrial designs, but for artwork for showrooms. So creating that, what Gerard or Stumpf would call environmental enrichment for the space that then Knoll had kept these sculptures over the years that now we get to tend. And so the space houses or displays about 300 pieces of furniture out of a collection that totals roughly 3,000. And so the racks are arranged in chronological order because a timeline, it's easy, but also I think a great first organizing principle to help people understand the progression of designs, ideas, aesthetics, materials, and quite practically on the business side, intermixing the brands and showing you that shared sensibility early on. Pretty proud of some of the early Florence Knoll furniture designs that we have in the collection. I think it's actually quite rare to see her furniture represented in collections, and so showing her architecture at a smaller human scale and also representing her. Sometimes I hear today, even from clients, even from architects, well, wasn't she just the wife? So as a staunch feminist, I guess, if you can still be that, it's really fun to recontextualize Florence Knoll as a business partner and also really the driving engine behind the success of that business and why it still exists today. I'm personally an Osamu Noguchi fan, so getting to see that Knoll had kept some of the rare rocking stools and actually one of his lamps that he designed for Knoll, it was amazing. The first year that Herman Miller and Knoll were putting out some of their most famous catalogs, they both had tapped into Noguchi as an artist to design consumer products for them, and this lamp for Knoll actually predates his more famous Akari. And then we get to create moments like this, juxtaposing an Eames lounge chair, the pedestal series, and my personal favorite, the pedestal ashtray, which you can actually see upstairs in the show now. We got to lend that. And some really amazing provenance for some of these pieces that we've inherited include this womb chair that's pictured here with Loya Saarinen. The chair was recovered or reupholstered in the 70s by Pipson, her daughter, in this Jack Lenore Larson textile. But Knoll had purchased this at auction about a decade ago, and it felt like Antiques Roadshow when I opened up a bag in a warehouse and saw this. Actually, these are some pieces that are upstairs as well, but again, getting to show sort of the progression, the different spaces these companies were creating furniture for as it sort of evolved into from the home to airport lounges, offices, and other public spaces. We also get to talk about our history of the work business, which frankly continues to be the bread and butter today, but showing you how sort of white-collar office work was enabled by Florence Knoll via the Knoll Planning Unit, but also Robert Probst at Herman Miller with the invention of Action Office. Andrew, I think these are organic and pretty. I think there's some artistry here with the ergon chair. It's very soft, but you are not wrong in that certainly this moment in time where a new material like foam is being used in the soft seating that is you need in an office because you're word processing, you're sitting for longer, and it's also a new material that these designers had access to at the time. And then, of course, those crazy postmodernists, we get to represent them as well via Knoll's collection and collaborations with Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi. Definitely, I'm just gonna say taking the piss like a British person, but like their renditions of plywood chairs, but making sort of fun of a Victorian or a Queen Anne and using a material certainly that these earlier mid-century designers had used, but having a bit of a sight gag, but also just very cool chairs, as well as Italian Ettore Sottsass doing his Memphis for Knoll, and Sottsass actually worked for Nelson early on, George Nelson early on in his career, so it all connects. Not only do we have furniture, but we have an amazing 2D graphic design collection. These posters were designed by Massimo and Lella Vignelli for an exhibition about Knoll that was held at the Louvre in the 70s, and so these were in Knoll's product development office, and the guys there were very generous in letting those go as their personal office display, and now they get to be enjoyed by our visitors. But this reading room is a place that we got to spend a lot of time with Bridget poring over, literal folder after folder to pull material, not only to support the scholarship for the essays, but also for lending to the exhibition. So there's boxes, so it shows you that we have a lot of boxes. And in those boxes are early catalogs from these companies, which again were revolutionary not only in their design, but also their function as sales tools. And so some of these are actually upstairs right now, including also process work from Florence Knoll and her famous paste ups that, Herman Miller and Knoll are businesses, and so their responsibility to the cultural relevance of their business certainly helps make money, but to have the foresight that they saved all of this stuff and took care of it, and now I have a job, which is amazing, really shows, I think, a testament to design leadership. I think even sponsoring something like this or working together. But it's been just really amazing to sort of uncover what has still existed, what Knoll saved, and to be able to have it be part of the show is quite special. And one really amazing thing that happened in the reading room more recently, maybe some of you saw it, was CBS Saturday Morning introduced our new archive space to the world, and Bridget was kind enough and brave enough to come be interviewed to talk about how she used the collection to support this show. So here's my creepy behind the scenes shot of our curatorial star here. So I will end with that, and cheers to Bridget. And now we're going to talk about this big old book.
In the back, we do have a flip through of the entire book, all 464 pages, just to give you a greater sense of the project as a whole.
Amazing. Okay, so I'll ask, after a year of research and years of thinking about this, how did you start putting the book together? What was the first?
Do you remember? Well, I mean, it was trying to create the structure for the book, which Bridget talked a lot about, was like the idea of nodes and like, would we have chapters? Well, no, we want this thing that people can dip into kind of at any point, because I don't think most people read front to back anymore in this kind of book. It's not like a novel where you're missing some key information early on if you skip to the back. So just to be able to create that and to create a really visually interesting book and different lengths of text, because we knew the essays were going to be on the longer side because a lot of them are new research. And so we wanted to counterbalance that with these, what we call spotlights, these quick dives into who is this person, like why are they significant, or what is this thing, if it was an object or if it was an idea.
Yeah, and I think an early idea we had was to kind of think of the book as a choose-your-own-adventure book. So as you'll see throughout, it's so easy when many design historians have foregrounded the same designers that we have, but often any designer will get, maybe 4 or 5 sentences in a catalog. And so really making sure that everyone had almost, over 750 words dedicated to really telling their story, leaving as good as possible footnotes so that future researchers can pick up where we left off. Writing together about 75 designers, of course, you can't hit everyone so exhaustively. And so it was really about, even if one other design historian latches onto one of these, it'll be a win. But yeah, so the choose your own adventure kind of comes out and pointing people backwards and forwards in the book of, you'll see Ray Komai, then you'll say, go to pages 244 to 245, and you can kind of jump around and enjoy it in many ways.
And that jumping around is the hardest part for editing, because
Yes.
you're cross-referencing everything and the pages shift, so you're constantly re-editing. That was a hell.
Been there. So the show upstairs is expansive. I mean, in content, obviously in objects, people and places that you're borrowing from, but I would argue that the book is even more expansive. And so what were the benefits of having the book to tell more? What was that process back and forth? Was it hinging on like, oh, we couldn't get that loan, but we could put an essay in?
Right.
What was that relationship?
Yeah, so I should disclose that when I do catalogs, so a curator, but also a book designer myself. And so I don't believe that one is a substitute for the other. So if you look at my catalogs, they often have much more, because what you can talk about in a book is different than what you can talk about in a gallery. And so that's why that's so expansive. And it's also making the book is the process for editing for the show. And so, yeah, so sometimes loans would not come through, or how we only have so much space. We can keep adding paper to that, in theory. I guess there's a limit, but in theory. But in the gallery, we only have X number of square feet, so we're constantly juggling, like what are the nodes within the exhibition that make sense? What are the themes that make the most sense?
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to think about what did and didn't survive. So an example of someone there was no way to really get him into the show, but we could get him into the book, is a designer named Ad Bates, who was a Black designer who did a lot of custom built-ins in apartments, none of which survived that we know of, and none of which could be loaned because they were built in. But that wasn't a reason to leave him out of the book, of course. And so there's a lot of also people that are excluded from design archives whose stories have been kind of lost, or no one has held on to all of these objects for an exhibition, but we still wanted to kind of piece together the photography, piece together their stories, and definitely include them in the book.
So Andrew, you mentioned you also are a book designer, and I'm a collector of a lot of those books. And so in this process, as someone who's made a lot of books, is a designer themselves, why Chris Baker?
Why Chris Baker?
Cranbrook alum.
Well, I like to work with, younger designers. I was at the Walker Art Center for like almost 20 years, and so I ran the publishing program there, as long with being a curator and other things. But I liked working with younger designers, because not all young designers are interested in book design, because it's like an old medium. But it's kind of hot now again, I guess, to do print. And so I need somebody to do that work. I can't just do it all myself. And I like collaborating with other people and how will they approach the content. And so sometimes I think I'm the worst client to work for, because then I'm like, but I try to play I used to be a teacher too, so I play that card. I'm like, what can we do that's really new and interesting? And so we went through that phase too. That wasn't the original cover, so I should say that. And so we had a much more radical, interesting cover, but I love that. Because what we did is we took the textiles. The textiles are the theme of the show. It's no pun intended, but they weave themselves throughout the show. And we had so many, we're really blessed here with our textile collection, but we also brought in a lot of textiles. But textiles is the area that you would find women and designers of color. And that was one of the areas which they could participate in. And so that became like bigger and bigger and bigger. And so laying out the show, it became more and more important. And we were really lucky to have such large quantities of it. And so when you're doing a furniture show, it's like all sculpture, right? So you have a lot of stuff on the floor, but you still have all these blank walls. So what are you going to do with that? And so the textiles became like this obvious but really beautiful way of introducing color, texture, form, and people and ideas throughout the show.
How did you pick these two textiles, and who are they by?
Yeah, so both the front and back cover, as well as the end papers, are all by women designers. So on the front cover, we have Esther Harasti, who helped found the Knoll Textiles division. On the back cover, we have Sunspots, definitely a favorite, by Pip Sansarn and Swanson. And then we also have textiles by Ruth Adler-Schnee, a 1946 Academy grad, and Jerry Kavanaugh, a 1952 grad. So 3 of the 4 are Cranbrook women designers. The front cover is Esther Harasti, she's non-Cranbrook, but all 4 textiles are in the Cranbrook Art Museum collection. And, we actually kind of discovered while putting the show together that in the late 40s and 50s, the art museum was buying quite radical textiles out of their textile shows. So we had some very rare early Knoll textiles that had not been shown probably in quite a while. It was just such a joy to kind of unearth them and bring them out into the gallery for the show. And so all of those textiles are from the collection.
We keep all our textiles rolled up. That's to protect them. And so you can't just like walk in a room and just see what's available. You have to like request it, and they have to roll it out. So it was a real sense of discovery for that, including the first Herman Miller textile from Alexander Gerard, 1952. It was a session. So it was just introduced and then a session to the collection.
Yeah, it's a session in 1953, a 52 squares textile.
The one upstairs?
Yes, the one upstairs.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay,
I didn't know that either.
That's exciting. Okay, don't groan when I ask this. This is for the heads, but can you talk about the typefaces and the choice to
I
do?
think Chris has to answer that question. Actually, he might have to answer the question of like the cover design, because he came up with different ideas. We talked about the idea of textiles as being, I think, section dividers originally.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these big expanses of color to help break up all the text, because the publisher was really worried because there's so many words in this.
Chris, are you mic'd now?
I think so.
Oh my
I
gosh,
mic'd?
we're opening this up. This is fun.
Hi, Chris.
Talk about these typefaces.
Yeah, I think it came out of there was a lot of different variations of everything that's in the book. And so when we were going back through, and I wish I had gone to your archive when we were in that early phase, but it was really just, scouring the internet, looking at different samples from different times and thinking about what was going to be the things that represented the time periods correctly, and to think about something that was also going to be more contemporary. So if you look at the sans serif, there's some funky things about it if you zoom in on it a lot, and you can see it on the essays when the type gets really big. So there's lots of little interesting things about it whenever you zoom in, and that Clarendon font is a contemporary version of the old one that was used a lot in the early Knoll advertisements and stuff. So, yeah.
And what a joy to work with Chris Baker. I think you have two of the most nitpicky people on earth on the stage, and he fielded so many changes and was such a trooper throughout this whole process.
Yeah, this is a big book.
It's a big book.
How many pictures are in it?
Just over 400.
Okay, can you enlighten us on what it actually takes to track down high-res files from everywhere to actually make this? Can you
Yes, this was
highlights?
news to me. I had never gone through this process before, and single-handedly, I think, corresponded with 95 archives securing these 400 images. So you're not only getting the high-res TIFF that is, big enough and high enough resolution to print in a book this size, but you also have to request permissions from, let's say, the family or the estate or the company that produces the design. And so it's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot to keep track of. Google Sheets saved my life. But I would say, we got a big batch from the Miller Knoll archive, probably near 75. It seems like a good guess, but yes, it was its own whole process that took up quite a lot of the time.
What was the one that was the most harrowing, and is there one you weren't able to get?
One that almost didn't happen is that we reprinted the feature on Joel Robinson, the designer I mentioned, who was featured in MoMA shows, from Ebony Magazine. And they could give us permissions, but they did not have a proper scan. And so we never got a copy of the magazine ourselves, and I looked on eBay for such a long time to bring one into our collection, to get it scanned, and it ultimately was a long chase that we ended up achieving, but that one took quite a while of just archives being slow to respond and things like that, so those always happen, but.
Yeah, and so the other thing about picture credits is that the cost of that is really incredible, when you
Yes.
add it all up. And so thanks to all those people who just gave us complimentary usage, which isn't, of course, everyone, but that's why it's so difficult to make books at that scale with that many images in it, because every time it's so many dollars per usage. So it's kind of crazy. So thanks for your complimentary. 75.
We call it free advertising, so we're happy to grant image permissions. Before we turn it over to Q&A, this seems very simple, but for both of you, what are some of your favorite spreads or favorite moments in the book?
Yeah, I showed a few of the favorites in the opening slideshow, but I would say probably the highlight on Ray Komai was really a fun one to write, and we welcomed a textile chair into our collection. Nearly 60 new designs came into the collection, and so Ray Komai was a fun one that I think turned out really nicely. And then Tomoko Miho as well, who worked for George Nelson for a while, was another fun one for me.
I would, gosh.
Amy's also looks incredible.
Yeah.
The Noguchi design.
Yes, yeah, the
essay.
Noguchi essay is the best image. We're using a lot of them. The two women playing chess is really amazing. That kind of photo shoot from the 50s, really amazing. For me, the spotlight discovery was the one on Barbara Staffordshire Solomon, who was the inventor of supergraphics in the late 60s. And then when I was writing that little spotlight, I had been able to meet her when she was still living, but I didn't put it all together, and so I started writing it and started researching the history of the term and everything, that I had realized that she had been erased by two architects, these two guys, who kind of purposely misled people around the dates of her invention and dismissed her as just a graphic designer. And they were architects trying to do the exact same thing. And so that was this kind of epiphany when I was writing that, oh, this is really cool. So I found visual evidence that she had created these super graphics 2 years before this other person that had claimed to have created them. So that was kind of a fun moment, but I was sad that she had passed away.
Well, I mean, what a great way to end / testament to the importance of this project and this exhibition. And I think making modern design more interesting and more inclusive. And I can't wait to see what other scholarship it will inspire in the future. So kudos to you both on such an important thing. And now let's open it up.
Thank you.
Congratulations, guys, on timing the conversation to exactly the length of the PDF of the book. That was really inspiring. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, this book is really wonderful. I have a question. You mentioned that you came across a lot of couples in mid-century modern partnerships. What's up with that? Like, why do you think there are so many?
It was one of the, what I discovered when I started researching some of the husband and wife teams that were in the section that has to do with craft. So there were a lot of people in ceramics and glass in particular that were husband and wife teams. And I think it's because I think the men were, more enlightened, and because it was entrepreneurial, they could control that kind of destiny and that kind of representation. And that came through because when I was researching them, there was a series of articles written in the Christian Science Monitor paper about some of these couples, and I noticed that there was a woman writing this, and she would point that out. So it's almost like she was leaving me clues. It was really fascinating. Like the Higgins are a famous couple of glass. They did that really beautiful rondelay. That's the 145 glass disc in the show. They're based in Chicago. Frances was from Georgia, actually, and she was a ceramicist, and so she encounters a workshop on glass slumping. Glass was just a commercial venture at that time. It hadn't really entered the studio art world. That would come via another Cranbrook person, actually, who helps develop some of the equipment to make that possible. But it was like so she brought that technique, and Mr. Higgins, it was actually a graphic designer teaching at a school at the Institute of Design in Chicago, and she's taking the class, and they meet, and they marry. But he's the one who's often associated with glass because he spends so much time in it, and he becomes kind of this figurehead for the glass thing. But I wanted to sort of recuperate her role in all of that, and that was fun to do. But it was just this pairing, and I think it had to do with the businesses. Like the Martzes are another. Martz is a well-known kind of ceramics. They do wonderful lamps, and that comes out of it's from Indiana. It was a lampshade company originally, and it was largely matriarchal, like a lot of the women in that family. And then the daughter, she gets sent to Alfred University, which has a big ceramics program, and the father wants her to go there to learn how to make lamp bodies so they could expand the business. And so she takes a large role. So a lot of the women are playing very instrumental roles in the success of these businesses.
I would just say, too, they're all workaholics. So if you're going to have any sort of marriage or relationship, you kind of got to be doing it together.
It helps to have the other spouse. That's the famous, Charles and Ray, they're both dedicated to that. It's not like one is
or
just
Florence, the brains and the bucks to help the business succeed.
Yeah.
All right, 2 questions. So in the spirit of eventually everything connects, what did you see a big Michigan connection amongst all of this, and why do you think Michigan was so big in this movement?
Absolutely, yeah. Michigan is along with California, I think those are the 2 big epicenters, and that surprises people. Not us exactly, because we're here at Cranbrook, but you have to go back to the post-war. And Detroit is one of the most important. I would say it's the most important city in the world. It's the Silicon Valley of its day because of the automobile, because of its production in World War II. You can look historically at that, and you can see all of these connections. So all of those Cranbrook people, of course, passed through Michigan. There's Herman Miller, of course, on the west side of the state, which is the west side of the state is where a lot of, there are more than 100 furniture manufacturers on the west side of the state. And that's because of immigration of certain skilled workers. And so that you would set up your company in those parts of the state. That's also why Pennsylvania, too, for Knoll,
Yeah, it's
right?
Dutch people, both for Herman Miller in West Michigan and Holland, and then in East Greenville, Pennsylvania, where Knoll set up its first manufacturing home, was also Pennsylvania Dutch. So immigrants, they make America great.
Yeah, so they were like building all of this stuff, but Michigan is really the crossroads for all of that, all the major commissions. The GM Tech Center, which Bridget called out, that is really the first corporate campus in America, and nothing at that scale. Today, it would be the equivalent of almost $1 billion in cost. And GM is the largest corporation in the world at that moment. So that's fueling the economy. The architects who are here, Yamasaki, Saarinen, they all have their offices here. This fuels a lot of that. So you have the schools and the universities, I guess, and then the practitioners, and then the companies. They're all here.
Okay, and the other question, you hinted to it, but how did you guys keep track of all the numbers and the constantly changing page numbers? That must be hell.
Well, I'm pretty good at, like, because I'm a designer, so I like fuss over these details so I can remember that or make notes. So we just have a system in place where we're like, make sure that, you know, it's in red and it's in bold, and then we change all of that at the end so that we don't miss any numbers. But Bridget has to control all the spreadsheets for all the permissions, and yeah, that's the unglamorous side of curation, is all the organization that one has to do. to
One
make something
benefit
happen.
of being type A, it came
Yes.
through
Yeah.
for this project.
Yeah.
Bridget is available, by the way, if anyone needs it.
Yes.
Any more questions? We'll take maybe one or two more before we wrap up. It's about 15 minutes before the museum closes. So if you'd like to take a spin through the exhibition, you may want to do that, but maybe some final questions? Shelley?
I saw that you had, oh, that's my essay.
That's your essay.
Shelley Salem, everybody.
I saw,
Good timing.
I saw you had an essay by Glenn Adamson in the book about designer craftsmen, and I was wondering kind of how you towed that line between design and craft in the show. It seems like you're mostly working with industrially manufactured things, but I imagine that was probably a curatorial decision you worked with early on to narrow things down, but I'm curious about your process for that.
Yeah, thanks. When I started, so I guess I have my own bias as a designer, right? So I've always thought of these people as being more like designers and manufacturers of things rather than as craftspeople. And so, like the Martzes, who have because I grew up in Indiana, so I kind of always knew about them, or from a long time, and so I always thought of them that way. But there were other people too when I started doing the research, like Edith Heath. Was thought of her. I mean, that company was making. They made architectural tiles for sale, and so they thought of that. Or Dorothy Liebes, kind of one of the most famous kind of textile designers. She would say, like, I'm not a weaver. I'm a designer, and she really embraced that creative director role, but she could also, of course, weave, but they really thought of themselves as being designers, so I tried to skew towards that. But I wanted to recuperate this notion of the hand was really important to counterbalance as part of the thesis. So that's why folks like the Ackermans are in the show, because they kind of embrace that Eamesian model, I think, too. The husband-wife team, they moved to California. They're from Detroit. It's kind of amazing. They're at Cass Tech grads. And then they moved to Los Angeles to live their creative lives. So that was all part of that calculus, but we were grateful that Glenn kind of helped put stitch that together for us, and then it kind of just came out from there, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much to Amy for coming back to visit us. I'm sure that we'll see Amy quite a bit this summer. Thanks to Andrew Satake Blaveld and Bridget Bartal and Chris Baker for their work on this incredible exhibition and catalog.